Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another night with Good Night Stories with Monica and my good friend George from the North Richland Hills Library. We are in the middle of the trial of Who Stole the Tarts. It is chapter 11, and Alice has just been noticing the jurors and everything they're writing down on their slates. Let's see what happens next. One of the jurors had a pencil that squeaked. This, of course, Alice could not stand, and she went round the court and got behind him and very soon found an opportunity of taking it away. She did it so quickly that the poor little juror, it was actually Bill the lizard, could not make out at all what had become of it. So, after hunting about for it, he was obliged to write with one finger for the rest of the day. And this was of very little use, as it left no mark on the slate. "Herald, read the accusation," said the king. On this, the White Rabbit blew 3 blasts on his trumpet, and then unrolled the parchment scroll and read as follows. "The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts, all on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts, and took them quite away." "Consider your verdict," said the king to the jury. "Not yet, not yet," the rabbit said hastily. "There's a great deal to come before that." "Call the first witness," said the king, and the White Rabbit blew 3 blasts on the trumpet and called out, "First witness!" The first witness was the Hatter. He came in with a teacup in one hand and a piece of bread and butter in the other. "I beg your pardon, your majesty," he began, "for bringing these in, but I hadn't quite finished my tea when I was sent for." "You ought to have finished," said the king. "When did you begin?" The Hatter looked at the March Hare, who had followed him into the court, arm in arm with the Dormouse. 14th of March, I think it was." 15th, said the March Hare. 16th, said the Dormouse. "Write that down," said the king to the jury, and the jury eagerly wrote down all 3 dates on their slates, and then added them up and reduced the answer to shillings and pence. "Take off your hat," the king said to the Hatter. "It isn't mine," said the Hatter. "Stolen!" the king exclaimed, turning to the jury, who instantly made a memorandum of the fact. "I keep them to sell," the Hatter added as an explanation. "I've none of my own. I'm a Hatter." Here the queen put on her spectacles and began staring hard at the Hatter, who turned pale and fidgeted. "Give your evidence," said the king, "and don't be nervous or I'll have you executed on the spot." This did not seem to encourage the witness at all. He kept shifting from one foot to the other, looking uneasily at the queen, and in his confusion he bit a large piece out of his teacup instead of the bread and butter. Just at this moment Alice felt a very curious sensation which puzzled her a good deal until she made out what it was. She was beginning to grow larger again, and she thought at first she would get up and leave the court, but on second thoughts she decided to remain where she was as long as there was room for her. "I wish you wouldn't squeeze so," said the Dormouse, who was sitting next to her. "I can hardly breathe." "I can't help it," said Alice very meekly. "I'm growing." "Well, you've no right to grow here," said the Dormouse. "Don't talk nonsense," said Alice. "You know you're growing too." "Yes, but I grow at a reasonable pace," said the Dormouse, "not in that ridiculous fashion." And he got up very sulkily and crossed over to the other side of the court. All this time, the queen had never left off staring at the Hatter, and just as the Dormouse crossed the court, she said to the officers of the court, "Bring me the list of singers in the last concert," on which the wretched Hatter trembled so that he took both his shoes off. "Give your evidence," the king repeated angrily, "or I'll have you executed, whether you're nervous or not." "I'm a poor man, your majesty," the Hatter began in a trembling voice, "and I hadn't but just begun my tea, not above a week or so ago, and what with the bread and butter getting so thin and the twinkling of the tea and—" "The twinkling of what?" said the king. It began with the T, the hatter replied. Of course twinkling begins with a T, said the king. Do you take me for a dunce? Go on. I'm a poor man, the hatter went on, and most things twinkled after that. Only the March Hare said, I didn't, the March Hare interrupted in a great hurry. You did, said the hatter. I deny it, said the March Hare. He denies it, said the king. Leave out that part. Well, at any rate, the Dormouse said, the hatter went on, looking anxiously round to see if he would deny it too. But the Dormouse denied nothing, because he was fast asleep. After that, continued the hatter, I cut some more bread and butter. But what did the Dormouse say? One of the jury asked. That I can't remember, said the hatter. You must remember, said the king, or you'll be executed. The miserable hatter dropped his teacup and bread and butter and went down on one knee. I'm a poor man, your majesty, he said. You're a very poor speaker, said the king. Here one of the guinea pigs cheered, and was immediately suppressed by the officers of the court. As that is a rather hard word, I will just explain to you how it was done. They had a large canvas bag, which tied up at the mouth with strings, and into this they slipped the guinea pig head first and then sat upon it. I'm glad I've seen that done, thought Alice. I've read so often in the newspapers at the end of trials. There was some attempt at applause which was immediately suppressed by the officers of the court, and I never understood what that meant until now. If that's all you know about it, you may stand down, said the king. I can't go no lower, said the hatter. I'm on the floor as it is. Then you may sit down, said the king. Here the other guinea pig cheered, and he was suppressed. Come, that finishes the guinea pigs, thought Alice. Now we shall get on better. I'd rather finish my tea, said the hatter, with an anxious look at the queen, who was reading the list of singers. You may go, said the king, and the hatter hurriedly left the court without even waiting to put on his shoes. And just take his head off outside, said the queen, added to one of the officers, but the hatter was way out of sight before the officer could get to the door. Call the next witness, said the king. The next witness was the Duchess's cook. She carried the pepper box in her hand, and Alice guessed who it was even before she got into the court by the way the people near the door began sneezing all at once. Give us your evidence, said the king. I shan't, said the cook. The king looked anxiously at the White Rabbit, who said in a low voice, Your Majesty must cross-examine this witness. Well, if I must, the king said with a melancholy air, and after folding his arms and frowning at the cook till his eyes were nearly out of sight, he said in a deep voice, What are tarts made of? Pepper, mostly, said the cook. Treacle, said a sleepy voice behind her. Collar that dormouse, the queen shrieked. Get that dormouse, turn that dormouse out of court, suppress him, pinch him, off with his whiskers, said the queen. For some minutes the whole court was in confusion, getting the dormouse turned out, and by the time they had settled down again, the cook had disappeared. Never mind, said the king with an air of great relief. Call the next witness. And he added in an undertone to the queen, Really, my dear, you must cross-examine the next witness. It makes my forehead ache. Alice watched the White Rabbit as he fumbled over the list, feeling very curious to see what the next witness would be like. For they haven't got much evidence yet, she said to herself. Imagine her surprise when the White Rabbit read out at the top of his shrill little voice and said, Alice! Chapter 12, Alice's Evidence. "Here!" cried Alice, quite forgetting in the flurry of the moment how large she had grown in the last few minutes. And she jumped up in such a hurry that she tipped over the jury box with the edge of her skirt, upsetting all the jurymen on the heads of the crowd below. And there they lay, sprawling about, reminding her very much of a globe of goldfish she had accidentally upset the week before. "Oh, I beg your pardon," she exclaimed in a tone of great dismay, and began picking them up as quickly as she could, for the accident of the goldfish kept running in her head, and she had a vague sort of idea that they must be collected at once and put back into the jury box. I think we'll stop there now, and we'll pick up next time to see what happens when Alice is on trial. Good night.